December 16, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell gripped her field binoculars as frost formed on the metal casing, her breath visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the morning mist rolling between snow-covered pines, she witnessed something that contradicted every intelligence briefing from the past 6 months. American armored vehicles appearing through the fog like mechanical phantoms, mounting weapons that seemed impossible for their chassis size. Main battle cannons on what should have been personnel carriers. Heavy artillery on platforms designed for troop transport. The German defensive line she commanded had prepared for tanks and infantry, but not for this hybrid warfare that blurred every tactical boundary her training had established. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mitchell would later document this morning in her classified after-action report filed with Wehrmacht intelligence in January 1945, one of the most detailed tactical analyses of American mobile artillery ever produced by German forces. The document, discovered in Berlin archives in 1978, revealed observations that challenged fundamental assumptions about American military doctrine. She had expected American forces to follow conventional patterns, predictable strategies learned from North African and Italian campaigns. Instead, she encountered something far more unsettling to the military mind. An army that refused to separate roles, that mounted ship-killing weapons on armored cars, that treated every vehicle as a potential weapons platform regardless of original design purpose. The initial sighting occurred at 05:47 hours near the village of Rocherath, documented in both German and American battle logs from December 16, 1944. Mitchell's company, the 12th Grenadier Regiment, held defensive positions along a ridgeline overlooking the Elsenborn approach. Standard German doctrine positioned them to repel American armor with anti-tank guns and infantry with machine gun nests. The morning reconnaissance revealed American movements that fit neither category. Through the lifting fog, shapes emerged that Mitchell initially classified as standard M3 half-tracks, the ubiquitous American personnel carrier seen throughout the European theater. Her training identified them easily: the distinctive tracked rear and wheeled front, the open-topped troop compartment, the expected complement of 12 infantrymen plus crew. Wehrmacht intelligence had cataloged these vehicles extensively: lightly armored, primarily defensive armament, tactical role limited to troop transport and mobile command posts. Mitchell prepared her forces accordingly, directing anti-tank weapons toward expected Sherman tanks while infantry positions readied for dismounted American soldiers. The first impossibility occurred when the lead vehicle, designated by American records as M3 GMC No. 347 from the 634th Tank Destroyer Battalion, crested the hill at 06:12 hours. What should have been a simple personnel carrier instead mounted a 75mm cannon that belonged on a medium tank. The weapon, a French-designed gun modified by American engineers, protruded from a platform where troops should have stood. The half-track silhouette, familiar from 1,000 intelligence photographs, now carried firepower capable of destroying fortified positions from ranges that made infantry defense suicidal. Mitchell's initial reaction, preserved in her after-action report, captured the cognitive dissonance. The vehicle approached using standard half-track maneuvers, but the weapon mount suggested medium tank capabilities. Our defensive doctrine provided no classification for this hybrid. Anti-tank teams questioned whether to engage what appeared to be a soft target carrying hard target weapons. Infantry units hesitated, uncertain if the vehicle would discharge troops or direct fire. The German defensive plan, carefully constructed over 3 weeks of preparation, had allocated weapons based on expected threats: Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets positioned for Sherman tanks, machine guns sighted for infantry approaches, artillery pre-registered for troop concentrations, The appearance of vehicles that combined multiple threat categories simultaneously invalidated these careful preparations. A personnel carrier mounting tank destroyer weapons could engage from distances where German anti-tank teams were vulnerable, yet presented a thin-skinned target that seemed wasteful of precious Panzerfaust ammunition. American tactical doctrine, as Mitchell would later discover through captured documents, had evolved beyond the rigid role separation taught in German military academies. The M3 gun motor carriage program, initiated in 1941 and documented in U.S. Army Ordnance Department records, reflected American industrial philosophy applied to warfare. If a chassis existed, mount the heaviest weapon it could carry. If a platform moved, make it a weapons delivery system. The distinction between transport and combat vehicles, sacred in German doctrine, meant nothing to American engineers focused solely on putting firepower where needed. The 75mm gun mounted on the M3 half-track, officially designated the M1897A4, originated as a French field artillery piece from World War I. American arsenals held thousands of these weapons in storage, perfectly functional but obsolete for modern artillery roles. Rather than waste the inventory, Ordnance Department engineers working at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland designed a mount allowing the vintage gun to serve as mobile tank destroyer. The combination seemed absurd by traditional standards, a nearly 50-year-old cannon on a vehicle designed for troop transport. Yet the result provided American forces with mobile anti-tank capability, produced quickly and cheaply from existing inventory. At 06:29 hours, the lead M3 GMC engaged Mitchell's forward observation post at a range of 1,200 meters. The 75mm high-explosive shell, traveling at 500 meters per second, struck the reinforced position with devastating effect. The concrete and timber structure, designed to withstand machine gun fire and shell fragments, disintegrated under the impact of a weapon that should have been miles behind the front lines on a towed carriage. Mitchell's forward observer team, 3 experienced soldiers who had survived campaigns from Stalingrad to Normandy, died instantly. The position they had occupied, carefully constructed to provide protection from expected threats, offered no defense against artillery fired from a mobile platform that approached like a personnel carrier. German tactical doctrine, refined through years of Eastern and Western Front experience, held that artillery belonged in the rear. Towed guns required elaborate preparation, careful sighting, communication with forward observers. Mobile artillery meant self-propelled guns, heavy vehicles on tracked chassis, expensive and relatively rare. The concept of mounting serious artillery on a light vehicle platform, accepting reduced armor in exchange for mobility and rapid deployment, contradicted fundamental assumptions about force allocation and tactical employment. The second M3 GMC, American records identify it as Vehicle 351, engaged at 06:34 hours from a different approach angle. This vehicle mounted the same 75mm weapon, but employed it against Mitchell's machine gun positions rather than fortifications. The high-explosive shells, designed for destroying field fortifications and light vehicles, proved devastatingly effective against sandbag emplacements. Each impact scattered sandbags like leaves, the blast effect amplified by the weapon's elevation, allowing plunging fire into positions designed to protect against direct horizontal threats. Mitchell's company faced a tactical problem without doctrinal solution. The vehicles approaching were too lightly armored to waste precious anti-tank weapons, yet carried armament that made infantry defense impossible. They moved with the speed and maneuverability of personnel carriers, making artillery targeting difficult, yet engaged from ranges where German small arms remained ineffective. The American force had effectively created a capability gap, a threat category that German defensive planning had not anticipated because it violated conventional wisdom about vehicle roles and weapon system integration. The American tactical employment of these hybrid vehicles demonstrated doctrinal flexibility that Mitchell found both impressive and frustrating. Rather than advancing in formation like traditional armor, the M3 GMCs operated in pairs, one providing covering fire while the other repositioned. They used terrain expertly, appearing on ridgelines long enough to engage targets before dropping back into defilade. The crews demonstrated training that suggested extensive practice with these specific weapons platforms, not improvised employment of available equipment. By 0700 hours, Mitchell's defensive position had sustained casualties that would have been impossible from conventional half-track employment. 7 machine gun nests destroyed by direct fire, 2 anti-tank positions eliminated before they could engage, the forward observation post obliterated. Casualty estimates exceeded 15%, losses typically associated with sustained artillery bombardment or armored assault, not reconnaissance by forces and personnel carriers. The psychological impact exceeded the material damage. Mitchell's soldiers, veterans of multiple campaigns, understood how to fight tanks and how to fight infantry. They possessed doctrine, training, and equipment for both threats. But vehicles that combined attributes of both while fitting neither category created uncertainty that paralyzed decision-making. Anti-tank teams waited for clear armor threats while artillery platforms destroyed their positions. Infantry prepared for dismounted assault, while mobile guns eliminated their defensive positions from standoff ranges. American forces advancing behind the M3 GMCs included conventional elements, Sherman tanks, and infantry squads that Mitchell's forces could have engaged effectively under normal circumstances. But the hybrid vehicles had created gaps in the defensive line, eliminated observation posts, and suppressed anti-tank weapons before the main assault even commenced. The role they played, advance guard and fire support and mobile artillery simultaneously, accomplished through doctrinal flexibility what German forces would have required multiple specialized units to achieve. The weapons mounted on these vehicles told a story about American industrial philosophy that Mitchell would only fully understand after the war. The 75mm M1897A4 gun represented American pragmatism applied to military hardware. Rather than designing new weapons from scratch, American engineers modified what existed in inventory. The French 75mm, legendary for its rapid-fire capability in World War I, remained perfectly functional for anti-tank and fire support roles in 1944. Mounting it on a mobile platform transformed obsolete artillery into relevant mechanized weapon systems. The M3 half-track chassis itself demonstrated American mass production capabilities that German industry could not match. White Motor Company, along with Autocar and Diamond T, produced over 40,000 half-tracks between 1941 and 1944. The vehicles shared components with commercial trucks, used engines from automobile production lines, and employed manufacturing techniques from civilian industry. This standardization allowed rapid production and easy maintenance, but also created a platform that could be modified for dozens of specialized roles. Mitchell observed at least 6 different M3 variants during the morning engagement: standard personnel carriers discharging infantry, command vehicles with additional radio equipment, the 75mm gun motor carriages engaging her positions, what appeared to be mortar carriers, an ambulance variant clearly marked with red crosses, even a vehicle mounting multiple machine guns in a configuration suggesting anti-aircraft role. The same basic chassis, modified for whatever role American forces required, demonstrated industrial flexibility that German specialized vehicle production could not replicate. The American crews operating these weapons platforms showed training levels that surprised Mitchell. German intelligence had characterized American soldiers as poorly trained, over-reliant on material superiority, lacking the tactical sophistication of Wehrmacht veterans. Yet the gun crews maneuvering M3 GMCs through difficult terrain while engaging targets with precision suggested extensive practice and professional competence.
They employed fire and movement tactics, used terrain for protection,
coordinated between vehicles without apparent radio communication, and demonstrated gunnery skills that indicated regular live-fire training. One engagement, occurring at 0742 hours and documented in both German and American after-action reports, illustrated American crew proficiency. An M3 GMC, designated Vehicle 356, engaged a German anti-tank gun position at extreme range, approximately 1,800 meters. The first 75mm round landed short, the second over, the third achieved direct hit, destroying the PAK-40 anti-tank gun and killing its crew. This bracketing technique, standard for artillery but difficult from a moving platform, demonstrated gunnery training that German forces typically associated with tank destroyers and self-propelled artillery, not improvised weapons on personnel carrier chassis. The broader American advance, of which these M3 GMCs formed only a small part, represented the opening phase of the Ardennes counteroffensive. Mitchell's defensive position guarded a secondary approach route, not a primary objective. Yet even this supporting effort employed weapons and tactics that challenged German defensive capabilities. The main American assault, striking elsewhere along the front, utilized similar hybrid vehicles and flexible doctrine that German forces found difficult to counter with rigid defensive preparations. By 0815 hours, Mitchell faced a decision that would define her military career. Her defensive position, compromised by weapons she had not prepared to counter, could not hold against the advancing American forces. German doctrine provided clear guidance for tactical withdrawal, preserving forces to fight another day, rather than accepting destruction in untenable positions. Yet abandoning prepared defenses without explicit orders violated the rigid command structure that defined Wehrmacht operations. Mitchell chose preservation over protocol, ordering her company to withdraw to secondary positions 3 kilometers east. The retreat exposed her forces to another American innovation that defied conventional military logic. As Mitchell's soldiers moved through forested terrain toward fallback positions, they encountered what should have been impossible. The same M3 half-tracks that had shelled their defensive positions now appeared ahead of them, having used superior mobility to flank the withdrawal route. German forces, trained to expect enemy armor on roads and infantry through forests, found themselves facing mobile artillery platforms moving cross-country at speeds that should have been reserved for reconnaissance vehicles. The M3 half-track's design, which seemed illogical to German engineers accustomed to specialized vehicles, proved devastatingly effective in the Ardennes terrain. The combination of front wheels for steering and rear tracks for traction allowed these vehicles to traverse snow-covered forest trails that would bog down fully tracked vehicles. American crews drove them like trucks through terrain that German doctrine classified as impassable to mechanized forces. This mobility, combined with the heavy weapons they carried, created a tactical advantage that no amount of German training had prepared Mitchell's forces to counter. At 0843 hours, Mitchell's withdrawal became a fighting retreat. American M3 GMCs, positioned along the flanks of her movement route, engaged with direct fire that turned organized withdrawal into desperate escape. The 75mm guns, firing high-explosive shells designed for fortifications, proved equally effective against troops in the open. Each impact created a kill radius of 15 meters, turning the forest into a killing ground where traditional cover provided no protection. Mitchell lost another 12 soldiers in the first 10 minutes, casualties inflicted by weapons that should have been positioned miles away on towed carriages, not racing through forests on mobile platforms. The psychological impact of these mobile artillery platforms exceeded their material destructiveness. German soldiers, conditioned by years of warfare to recognize and respond to specific threats, found their training inadequate. The sound of tracked vehicles suggested tanks, triggering anti-armor responses. The caliber of incoming fire indicated artillery, prompting soldiers to seek cover from indirect bombardment. Yet the vehicles delivering this punishment were neither tanks nor traditional artillery, but hybrid platforms that combined attributes of both while conforming to neither expected pattern. Mitchell's radio operator, Corporal Elizabeth Schneider, managed to establish contact with regimental headquarters at 09:01 hours. The report Mitchell transmitted reflected confusion that extended beyond her isolated position. Multiple German units along the front reported similar encounters with American vehicles mounting weapons that exceeded their expected capabilities. Half-tracks carrying tank destroyer guns, armored cars mounting howitzers. Even reports later confirmed of Sherman tank chassis modified to carry massive artillery pieces that could demolish concrete fortifications. The American military philosophy emerging from these encounters represented a fundamental departure from German doctrinal thinking. Where Wehrmacht forces specialized, creating distinct vehicle types for specific roles, American forces adapted, mounting whatever weapon a chassis could carry regardless of original design intent. This flexibility, born from industrial capacity that could produce vehicles faster than specialized designs could be perfected, gave American forces tactical options that German planning had not anticipated. By 09:30 hours, Mitchell's company reached secondary defensive positions near the village of Würzfeld. These fallback positions, prepared weeks earlier as contingency against American breakthrough, offered better terrain and interlocking fields of fire. Yet Mitchell understood, with clarity born from morning's brutal lessons, that static defenses meant little against mobile firepower that could maneuver faster than defensive preparations could adapt. The American vehicles she had encountered moved with a speed and flexibility that made prepared positions merely temporary obstacles rather than decisive defensive barriers. The respite at Würzfeld lasted 37 minutes. At 10:07 hours, American forces appeared again, this time in greater numbers and with even more bewildering vehicle configurations. Mitchell identified at least 15 M3 half-tracks in the advancing formation, but now they were accompanied by other improvised weapons platforms that challenged every assumption about American military organization. Trucks mounting multiple rocket launchers, jeeps carrying recoilless rifles, even a tracked vehicle that appeared to be nothing more than an engine and tracks supporting a massive howitzer with minimal armor protection. This particular vehicle, which American records identify as an M7 Priest self-propelled howitzer, mounted a 105mm artillery piece on a Sherman tank chassis. The weapon could deliver devastating indirect fire from protected positions, but American crews also employed it for direct fire support, using artillery designed for targets miles away to engage enemy positions at ranges measured in hundreds of meters. The psychological effect of receiving a 105mm fire from what appeared to be a tank destroyer paralyzed German defensive responses, as soldiers uncertain whether they faced armor or artillery made fatal hesitations in target prioritization. The artillery barrage that commenced at 10:15 hours combined conventional indirect fire with direct fire from these mobile platforms, creating a bombardment that seemed to come from every direction simultaneously. Mitchell's soldiers, veterans who had survived Russian artillery on the Eastern Front and Allied bombardment in Normandy, described this American fire as uniquely disorienting. Traditional artillery followed predictable patterns, firing from rear areas with observable trajectories, but American mobile artillery appeared on ridgelines, fired several rounds, then disappeared before counter-battery fire could be arranged, only to reappear at different locations minutes later. The tactical flexibility this provided, American forces transformed artillery from a supporting arm into an integral part of maneuver warfare. German doctrine separated artillery and armor, each operating according to distinct principles with coordination occurring at high command levels.
American forces, by mounting artillery on mobile platforms and employing it like armor, achieved integration at the tactical level that gave small unit commanders capabilities typically reserved for division-level operations.
Mitchell observed American infantry advancing behind this mobile artillery curtain with a coordination that suggested extensive joint training. The infantry did not wait for artillery to cease before moving, as German doctrine prescribed. Instead, they advanced parallel to the mobile guns, with artillery shifting fire only meters ahead of the infantry line. This dangerous proximity, which would have been impossible with traditional towed artillery, became feasible with mobile platforms whose crews could see the infantry they supported and adjust fire in real time. At 10:42 hours, Mitchell made her second tactical withdrawal of the day, this time with regimental authorization transmitted through increasingly desperate radio traffic. The entire defensive line was collapsing under American pressure that combined material superiority with doctrinal flexibility. German forces, prepared to fight the methodical American army of previous campaigns, instead faced an enemy that had learned from 2 years of European warfare and adapted with a speed that rigid German doctrine could not match. The withdrawal route toward Buchenbach took Mitchell's remaining forces through terrain where American mobility advantages multiplied. The rolling hills and scattered forests of the Ardennes region, which German planners had assumed would favor defense, instead provided American mobile forces with endless flanking opportunities. Every ridge concealed potential firing positions for half-tracks mounting 75mm guns. Every forest trail offered routes for vehicles that combined truck-like road speed with cross-country capability that German intelligence had classified as impossible. During this withdrawal, Mitchell witnessed an engagement that would haunt her professional analysis for years afterward. A single American M3 GMC, separated from its unit and apparently conducting independent reconnaissance, encountered a German convoy of 3 trucks carrying ammunition and supplies. The half-track, rather than avoiding contact or waiting for support as German doctrine would have prescribed, immediately engaged. The 75mm gun destroyed the lead truck with its first shot, blocked the road, then systematically destroyed the remaining vehicles while German infantry scrambled for cover in adjacent fields. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. One lightly armored vehicle, carrying a crew of 5, had eliminated a convoy and its 30-soldier escort through aggressive action that violated every German principle about reconnaissance forces avoiding combat. Yet the tactic succeeded because the vehicle possessed firepower disproportionate to its appearance, and crew training that emphasized decisive action over cautious reporting. This initiative at the lowest tactical levels, combined with weapons that punched far above their weight class, created an American military effectiveness that exceeded what German analysis predicted based purely on equipment counts and unit strengths. By 1200 hours, Mitchell's company had sustained 40% casualties, losses that would normally render a unit combat ineffective. Yet the survivors, hardened by morning's brutal lessons, had begun adapting to American tactics. They learned to engage the lightly armored half-tracks with machine gun fire rather than wasting anti-tank weapons. They discovered that the 75mm armed vehicles, while deadly at range, became vulnerable when forced into close quarters where their large guns could not depress sufficiently to engage nearby targets. They recognized that American mobile artillery, for all its flexibility, still required relatively flat firing positions that terrain-aware defenders could anticipate and avoid. These adaptations came too late to save the defensive line, but provided valuable intelligence for future engagements. Mitchell's after-action report, compiled during a brief respite that afternoon, detailed specific vulnerabilities of American mobile artillery platforms. The open-top design left crews exposed to indirect fire and grenades. The light armor, sufficient against small arms, could not withstand even the smallest anti-tank weapons. The 75mm guns, while powerful, had limited ammunition capacity compared to traditional artillery. Most significantly, the vehicles required relatively clear terrain for maneuver, becoming vulnerable when channeled into narrow approaches where German forces could mass fire. This intelligence, distributed through Wehrmacht command channels over following days, helped German forces develop counterattacks against American mobile artillery. Yet the larger lesson, that American industrial capacity and doctrinal flexibility had created a new form of mechanized warfare, remained difficult for German high command to accept. The reports described vehicles that should not exist, tactics that violated military logic, and effectiveness that exceeded what German analysis predicted. Many senior officers dismissed these accounts as exaggerations born from battlefield stress, unable to accept that American forces had evolved beyond the cautious, methodical enemy encountered in previous campaigns. Mitchell's personal transformation during this single day of combat reflected a broader shift occurring throughout German forces facing American armies in late 1944. She had begun the morning confident in German tactical superiority, certain that American material advantages would prove insufficient against Wehrmacht training and doctrine. She ended the day understanding that American forces had transformed quantity into quality, using industrial capacity not merely to outnumber German forces, but to create capabilities that German specialized production could not match. The evening of December 16th found Mitchell's reduced company occupying hasty defensive positions near Butgenbach, part of a contracting German perimeter that would soon be encircled in what Americans called the Battle of the Bulge. Around her, the sounds of American mobile artillery echoed through the darkening forest, those distinctive cracks of 75mm guns firing from platforms that moved like ghosts through terrain German forces had thought impassable to heavy weapons. Each report reminded her that the Wehrmacht faced not merely superior numbers, but an enemy that had learned to fight in ways German doctrine had not anticipated and could not easily counter. The M3 gun motor carriages, those improvised weapons platforms that mounted outdated French artillery on personnel carrier chassis, represented something more significant than clever engineering. They embodied an American approach to warfare that valued results over theoretical purity, that accepted good enough solutions implemented quickly rather than perfect designs delivered late. This philosophy, applied across American military production, created an arsenal of hybrid vehicles and improvised weapons that collectively overwhelmed German forces prepared to fight the war they expected rather than the war Americans had learned to wage. As darkness fell on December 16, 1944, Mitchell understood that German forces faced not merely a battle, but a reckoning with military realities that high command had refused to acknowledge. American industrial capacity, combined with doctrinal flexibility and tactical initiative at lowest levels, had created an enemy that German Wehrmacht, for all its tactical excellence and fighting spirit, could not defeat through skill alone. The unusual vehicles she had witnessed that morning, those impossible combinations of chassis and weapons that violated every principle of specialized design, had demonstrated a truth that would define the war's final months. American forces had stopped fighting the war German doctrine expected and had begun fighting the war American industry could win.